They just want to come inside. Why don't you invite them inside? We're talking about black-eyed children today. Hello, my spooky crew, and thanks for coming back to my channel, or welcome to my channel if this is your first time here. My name is Alex, and thanks for coming to my spooky corner of the internet. I get asked a lot, Alex, what's the one thing that freaks you out the most? My answer? Black-eyed children, also known as BEKs. Or black-eyed kids. Even if they are just an urban legend that was born from the internet, they freak me out big time. Like, nope, that's my hard no. And it's one of those things that I avoid just in case if they're real. But we have to face our fears, right? Right? So I'm going to share a few stories about black-eyed children, or black-eyed kids, or BEKs. Now, if this is a new thing for you, you may be wondering, what are black-eyed children? They're kids between the ages of 6 and 18, and they have black eyes. Now, we're not talking about like wide pupils, we're talking about everything is black. Everything. Like the demons from Supernatural. When they blink and they get the black eyes, yeah, like those. And they also have very pale skin, and they're often wearing outdated clothes. And it's almost like they're trying to blend in, but they can't get it quite right. And witnesses have reported that they seem to come out of nowhere. Even in places where there's like no sign of human life, they just appear out of nowhere. And they're most often seen coming out at nighttime or even around sunset. And they will say things like, "We're just children. Tell us to come in. Why don't you let us in? Let us come inside." And they're very insistent about coming into your space, whether that's your car, your house, your tent. And they ask to do these things so that they can like call home or read or even sew. Super random. And they also have absolutely no issues coming up to adults and asking them for things, which most kids aren't really like that. Like they'll have some kind of hesitation. And people who have encountered black-eyed kids have reported feeling like an extreme sense of dread, like their fight or flight instincts kick in. They're filled with fear and something just doesn't feel right. And also their voices are like hypnotic, almost sing-songy. You might be wondering too, well, what happens if you let them in? Well, we're gonna find that out later. So before we get started, be sure to click on that subscribe button, give this video a like, and click on that notification bell so you'll know every time I upload a new video. And I upload every Monday. And if you love spooky stuff and want to read blogs about spooky things, or read books about spooky things, or listen to podcasts about spooky things, then be sure to go to my website at thespookystuff.com. So let's talk about the story that seemed to start it all. It's the story of Brian Bethel. While this may not be like the first story of a black-eyed kid encounter, it is the story that gained traction and became really popular and inspired people to come out with their own black-eyed kid stories. Now, this happened in 1998 in Abilene, Texas, and it was about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. And Brian Bethel was at a shopping center, and I guess he was dropping off a check to pay a bill, because, you know, we did that in 1998. While he was in his car writing out the check, he was startled by a knock on the door on the driver's side window. And Brian looked over and saw two boys staring at him. And he thought they looked around the ages of around 10 or 14. I mean, that's kind of freaky. I mean, you're writing a check in your car, it's nighttime, I think it was raining, you hear a knock out on your window, and you look up and there's two kids staring down at you. And one boy had olive skin with brown hair, and the other boy had very pale skin with orange hair. And they were dressed in appropriate clothing for the weather and the time period. But what was weird for Brian was that his fight or flight instinct immediately kicked in, and he started to feel that sense of dread. And he was feeling really uncomfortable. So Brian rolled his window down and he asked the boys what they wanted. And the boys told him that they wanted to see a movie, but they left their money at home. And they wanted Brian to help them out by giving them a ride to their house so that they could get the cash. And Brian was still feeling really uncomfortable at this point, and so he didn't answer right away. And another thing that he noticed was that the movie that the boys wanted to see was almost over, so something didn't seem right. And one of the boys said, "We just want to see a movie. We just want to go to our house. We're just two little boys," which is weird to say. And Brian was still feeling a lot of hesitation, and the boys were saying, "It won't take long. We'll be gone before you know it. Let us in." And then at that moment, that was when Brian made eye contact with the boys. He claims that their eyes were solid black, like coal. And during this whole time, Brian had his car on, and when he saw the coal black eyes of the boys, he got so scared that he raced away. He fled the scene, and when he looked back to where the boys were, they were gone. This next story comes from Raleigh, North Carolina, which is where I live. So this is great. I heard this story from one of my team members, and then I soon realized that it made the news online, which was, again, great. So 20-year-old Carrie Keisner was on her way home from Wake Tech Community College when she decided to make a stop at Triangle Town Center, which is a big shopping mall in Raleigh. It's about 15 minutes away from me. So she went to the mall, did her shopping, and after she was done with the mall, she was walking back to her car, and at this point it was nighttime. And as she was walking to her car in the parking lot, she noticed that there wasn't a lot of people around. The only two people that she saw was a little boy and an old lady. And the old lady was searching through her purse as if she was looking for something. But Carrie noticed that there was something wrong with the boy. His posture seemed unnatural, and he was really pale, and she thought she saw what were dark rings around his eyes, so his posture just didn't seem human. And as Carrie walked by the pair, she got a better look at the little boy. His eyes were completely black. No whites, just black. And immediately, Carrie's fight or flight instinct kicked in, and so she raced to her car. And the little boy turned and looked at her, and then he walked away and he walked into the woods. Not to another car, not into the mall, he walked into the woods. This next story comes from a book called Black-Eyed Children by David Weatherly. I actually interviewed David Weatherly several years ago about black-eyed kids. So this takes place in Camp Lejeune in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Great, another North Carolina story. So there was a Marine based at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, and he was living in the barracks. It was Saturday night, and he was in his barrack watching a movie when he heard a knock at the door. And he opened the door and he saw two little kids standing at the door looking at him. Keep in mind, this was a military base in the barracks. This is not supposed to happen. And the Marine was understandably freaked out, and he was actually looking around to see if there was any adults around, and also his fight or flight instincts kicked in as well. So the Marine asked what they were doing there, because it's a military base, and the kids said that it was really cold out and that they wanted to come in and read. And the Marine thought that this was really weird because the kids didn't mention any parents. And the kids also didn't mention whether or not they were in any trouble. The fact that they just wanted to come in and read was strange. They didn't want to use a phone to call their parents. They weren't lost. They just wanted to come in and read because it was cold out. And the kids kept staring at the Marine, and he said that he felt like he was being hunted. Now keep in mind, Marines go through really intense training for situations just like this when dealing with adversaries and enemies, so the fact that he was feeling like really scared, that's saying something. And the Marine shut the door and he locked it. He was like, nope, not doing this today. And what was really creepy was that the kids kept knocking on the door. And this continued for about 5 minutes. And after a brief pause, he then started to hear rattling on the window. Now here's something I forgot to mention. The Marine lived on the 3rd floor, meaning there was no way for anybody to be rattling the windows on the 3rd floor of a military barrack. And then after a few more minutes, it went quiet. And so the next morning, the Marine actually tried to follow up with the duty officer and just to see if there had been any kids on the base. And the officer on duty actually thought that he was drinking and he had lost his mind for a moment. So there were no kids on the base. The officer saw nothing. All right, this next story comes from Creepypasta. It's supposedly true, but I have my doubts, but it's still a really freaky story. So it's up to you to believe whether or not this story is true. I personally love this story, even though it does scare me. So 26-year-old David Krabs was camping in Sleeping Dunes National Lakeshore in Michigan in August 2010. So he stops at the ranger station to get his camp assignment, and he notices two kids standing in front of his vehicle. This isn't necessarily weird. So before he heads off to the campsite, he decides to use the restroom at the ranger station. And while he's in his stall, he hears a few kids talking, and he assumes it's the kids from outside. And when he got out of the stall, the two kids were in the bathroom with him, and they were just standing there and staring at him. So he goes to the sink to wash his hands, and as he was washing his hands, the kids kept staring at him from the mirror. And David immediately notices that their eyes are black. And one of the kids steps forward and asks him, "Can you help us?" And David is understandably freaked out and says, "No, I gotta go." Understandably, David was shaken up. So he goes camping, he's deep in the trail, and on the first night, he's still freaked out about the boys that he saw, but the first night is uneventful, he gets a good night's sleep, it's fine. But he was legitimately freaked out, and so he decided to keep the campfire going all night, which is not what you're supposed to do when you're camping. That also meant that he went through all of his firewood, so he needed to get more. So the next day, he's scouring the trail to get more firewood, and he runs into the boys again. And once again, one of the boys steps forward and says, "Can you help us? We can't find our campsite." And David is hit with that same sense of dread. He told them no at first, and then he asked them if they were playing a game on him. And eventually David tells them that they can come with him. Big mistake. And also, it was raining when all this was happening. So David soon regrets that invitation. As he's leading the boys to his campsite, he gets this overwhelming sense of dread and fear. So he runs. He runs as fast as he can in the rain. He runs and runs with only his lantern for light. And he reaches his campsite and he goes straight into his tent. He's soaking wet, but his dry clothes are under a tree in a waterproof backpack. But David is so freaked out that he doesn't dare go back outside. Every gust of wind, every branch that moves, he swears that he could hear the sinister words of the boys. And finally, several hours later, David is going crazy from all the sounds and everything happening. He finally hears, "Help us, let us in." And David starts screaming and he's crying and he's saying, "No, no, no, no." And the boys stand outside of his tent for hours, begging to be let in. All night this happens. But then the next morning, there's no sign of the boys. So David quickly changes into his dry clothes, packs up his campsite, and books it back to his vehicle. And he heads home. Alright, one more story. So this is a story I've heard around the BEK forums. And I think David Weatherly might have told the story too. So a woman is in the parking lot in a shopping center and her son is with her. And the details of the story are fuzzy, but she runs into a black-eyed child. I think the child does approach her like they all do. And of course, his eyes are completely black. In this case, his clothes are outdated and she's freaked out. And so she tells the black-eyed child to go away. She goes into the store and she has her son with her, but she decides to leave her son in the van, which, yeah, I wouldn't have done that. And her son's like young, but he's not like a toddler. He's like, maybe first, second grade. So the woman does her shopping. She's all done. She goes out into the parking lot. She goes to her minivan where her son is. She opens the door and finds her son with the black-eyed child. And apparently the BEK asked her son to come in and her son let him in. And the woman immediately tells the black-eyed child to get out, to leave. And she sees that her son looks really, really sick. He's sweating, he's pale, he looks like he's near death. And the woman calls 911 and her son is immediately taken to the hospital. He makes it, but he barely survives. And apparently the son's body was shutting down. And all of his levels like red blood cell count, protein, everything were all out of whack. And there have been other stories of people who have let the black-eyed kids in and then they end up getting really sick, or worse, they start getting like nosebleeds, cancer, their animals end up going missing or dying. There was one couple that let a black-eyed child in and the husband got cancer afterwards, like a really rare form of skin cancer that normally comes from tanning beds. So there's something really weird happening when you let a black-eyed child in. And there are so many theories as to what black-eyed children are. Like some people think that they're demonic, they could be alien-human hybrids, or just aliens, or they're trickster spirits. And honestly, whatever they are, until we can get one and ask it questions and study it, we're never gonna know what they are. But one thing I can tell you for sure is to never let them in. What do you think of black-eyed kids? Let me know in the comments. And before you go, don't forget to share this video with your friends and family who also enjoy the spooky stuff or black-eyed children. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next round.